Billings up to Clark. Clark takes her first shot. Finds herself down low, kicks it out to Caitlin Clark. Clark puts it up. Getting themselves prepared for the World Cup that they've already qualified for, but really not letting their foot off the glass on offense.
The mainstream sports media is a factory of manufactured consent, desperately trying to protect the fragile egos of an obsolete establishment. If you look at the box score of this return game, if you listen to the sanitized press conferences and the polite commentary, you are being fed a deeply insulting, fundamentally dishonest narrative. They want you to believe that keeping Caitlin Clark on the bench to start this game was a coach's decision, a respectful nod to the veterans, a strategic easing in process after a 200-day absence from the court. That is not a strategy. That is catastrophic organizational malpractice. What we actually witnessed was a desperate, pathetic, and ultimately futile attempt by the legacy political power structure of women's basketball to delay the inevitable hostile takeover of their entire industry. They put Chelsea Gray and the old guard in the starting lineup not because they offer a higher probability of winning, but because the establishment is absolutely terrified of the undeniable mathematical reality. Caitlin Clark is the single most destructive, efficient, and monopolistic economic force in the history of the sport, and the moment she touches the hardwood, every single veteran player becomes instantly expendable. After sitting in the dark for over 6 months, recovering, recalibrating, and watching the league attempt to function without its primary algorithmic engine, Clark returned to the court with a level of kinetic violence and operational supremacy that should have every single general manager in the league filing for immediate bankruptcy. This was not a return. This was a blood oath executed in front of empty seats, a chilling reminder that the entire sport's valuation is tied to the biometric output of one specific player. Let us completely deconstruct the sheer terrifying magnitude of the statistics she produced, because they are not merely numbers on a page. They are the financial earnings report of a monopoly crushing its competitors. 17 points, 12 assists, a plus 35 rating in highly restricted, politically suppressed minutes. You do not achieve a plus 35 rating in a professional basketball game by simply playing well. You achieve a plus 35 rating by fundamentally altering the gravitational pull of the court geometry. You achieve it by hijacking the central nervous system of the opposing defense and forcing them to react to threats that haven't even materialized yet. When Clark steps onto the floor, she operates as a high-frequency trading algorithm, identifying structural vulnerabilities in the pick-and-roll coverage and exploiting them milliseconds before the human eye can even process the rotation. Her 12 assists are not a product of unselfishness. They are a product of absolute, tyrannical control over the spatial dynamics of the half-court. She is functioning as an apex venture capitalist, taking distressed, inefficient assets, players who struggle to create their own shot under pressure, and injecting them with massive amounts of offensive liquidity. She spoon-feeds them high-percentage looks at the rim, artificially inflating their field goal percentages and making the entire roster look like a synchronized corporate machine. The coaching staff's decision to start her on the bench is the equivalent of a Fortune 500 tech company keeping its most advanced, revolutionary artificial intelligence locked in the basement because the middle management is afraid of losing their corner offices.
To what Caitlin Clark is going to do in year 3, you know what? I don't blame Breanna Stewart, Brianna Turner, Nafisa Collier, Aneka Ogwumike if they say themselves, we can't get beat like this. This girl is coming for revenge.
Listen to the absolute dread in that analysis. I don't blame Breanna Stewart, Brianna Turner, Nafisa Collier if they say themselves, we can't get beat like this. This is the psychological warfare that nobody wants to openly discuss on the national broadcasts. The legacy superstars of this league, the players who have spent the last decade building their carefully curated brand equity and collecting their accolades, are currently staring down the barrel of functional obsolescence. Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier are elite, generational talents in the traditional sense, but they operate within the established parameters of the game. Caitlin Clark does not operate within the parameters. She burns the parameters to the ground and builds a new stadium on the ashes. When the rest of the league watches film of this return game, they are not looking for tactical weaknesses to exploit. They are looking at their own grim, unavoidable demise. They are watching a player who was away from the game for 200 days step onto the floor without a single microscopic ounce of rust, executing cross-court, weak-side passes with a velocity and precision that simply cannot be defended by human biomechanics. The rest of the league is now on notice. Year 3 is not going to be a competition. It is going to be a highly orchestrated, incredibly violent reckoning. The window for beating Caitlin Clark has officially slammed shut, and every single franchise that did not spend the offseason completely restructuring their defensive philosophy is going to be liquidated by the middle of July. We have to address the toxic, egocentric locker room politics that lead to a generational asset being treated like a second-tier bench player. The starting lineup featured Chelsea Gray, a veteran point guard whose historical resume is unquestionable, but whose current kinetic output is a fraction of what is required to compete in this new pace and space era. The mainstream media demands that young players wait their turn and respect the hierarchy, but in the hyper-capitalist, brutally unforgiving environment of elite professional sports, hierarchy is a myth perpetuated by those who no longer possess the leverage to win on merit alone. True leadership, true veteran presence is not about demanding a starting spot based on a resume from 3 years ago. It is about recognizing the shifting tectonic plates of the market and willingly surrendering your position for the greater corporate good.
Clearly the best player. The team, if you can believe it, looked night and day. Clark on the floor, Clark on the bench. Clark on the floor, ball's moving, pace is flowing, Clark on the bench.
The analysis here is painfully accurate. Night and day, Clark on the floor, ball's moving, pace is flowing, Clark on the bench. It is a completely different operational reality. When the legacy point guards are running the system, the offense is stagnant, predictable, and incredibly easy to scout. It relies on slow, methodical half-court sets that allow the defense to rest and reset. When Clark steps over the line, the pace of the game violently accelerates. The transition offense becomes a lethal weapon. The ball does not stick. It moves with algorithmic efficiency, finding the open shooter or the rolling big before the defense can even establish their basic shell principles. The absolute arrogance of the coaching staff to look at that undeniable mathematical contrast and still attempt to justify a bench role for Clark is staggering. It is a dereliction of duty. They are actively choosing political optics and locker room appeasement over offensive optimization. This is exactly how massive corporations fail. They refuse to pivot to new technology because they are too emotionally attached to the legacy systems that made them successful in the past. Let us dive even deeper into the economic reality of the veteran mindset. Chelsea Gray and the old guard know exactly what is happening. They are not blind to the geometry of the floor. They can feel the energy in the building completely evaporate when Clark sits, and they can feel the atmospheric pressure skyrocket the second she checks in.
You know what a real vet would do? A real vet would say, you know what? Here's my spot. I ain't competing with that. You know what? We're a better team if you take my spot and I try to fit in where I can get it.
You know what a real vet would do? A real vet would say, you know what? Here's my spot. I ain't competing with that. This is the crux of the entire power struggle. The veterans are desperately trying to hold onto the steering wheel of a vehicle that is currently being rocketed into the stratosphere by an engine they do not control. Instead of embracing the role of a stabilizing mentor for the second unit, they demand to remain the focal point, resulting in catastrophic inefficiencies, early turnovers, and a completely dysfunctional opening quarter. The real tragedy here is that the coaching staff lacks the organizational spine to look the veterans in the eye and strip them of their unwarranted authority. They are allowing the fragile egos of the past to hijack the infinite potential of the future. When Clark finally entered the game and immediately executed a flawless pick and roll with Monique Billings, she was not just scoring a basket, she was delivering a devastating, undeniable indictment of the entire coaching staff's starting lineup decision. She makes the game look laughably simple because she processes defensive coverages at a frame rate that the legacy players simply cannot comprehend. The ripple effect of Clark's presence extends far beyond her own statistical output. It completely redefines the market value of every single player sharing the hardwood with her. We saw Angel Reese, Ryan Howard, Paige Buchers, and Kiki Iriafen all have their offensive games exponentially elevated the exact moment Clark began distributing the ball. Let us talk about Angel Reese. The media loves to manufacture a bitter rivalry between Reese and Clark, framing it as a zero-sum game where only one can succeed. But the raw, unedited tape of this game tells a completely different, much more terrifying story for the rest of the league. When Clark and Reese are on the floor together, operating in the same ecosystem, the pick-and-roll synergy is absolutely devastating. Clark draws the double team, manipulating the defense with her shooting gravity, and perfectly layers a lob pass over the top to a rolling Angel Reese. It is unguardable. Clark takes the intense, physical, rebounding focused game of Reese and weaponizes it with elite spacing and precision delivery. And then you add Paige Buchers to the equation. When Buchers and Clark share the backcourt, you are no longer watching a basketball game. You are watching a symphony of offensive destruction. The defense cannot collapse on Clark's drives because Buchers is waiting on the perimeter to execute a lethal one-dribble pull-up. They cannot blitz Buchers because Clark is already relocating for a deep, demoralizing three-pointer. It is an impossible mathematical equation. Clark makes everyone around her undeniably immensely wealthier in terms of production, which makes the decision to start her on the bench even more financially and strategically indefensible. This brings us to the darkest, most controversial, and utterly undeniable reality of the entire situation. The performance we just witnessed is not just a warning for the upcoming season, it is the ultimate, indisputable validation of the massive corporate conspiracy that took place in the summer of 2024. For months, the mainstream basketball establishment gaslit the public. They looked the fans in the eye and claimed that Caitlin Clark was left off the Olympic roster because she needed rest, because she lacked veteran experience, because she wasn't quite ready for the physicality of the international game. It was all a lie. It was a carefully constructed, desperately coordinated protectionist policy designed to shield the fragile legacy of the old guard from being entirely eclipsed on the global stage.
Folks, this is why she wasn't on the team in 2024. They know she would have came in dominating. She would have came in wrecking-ish. And the story...
Folks, this is why she wasn't on the team in 2024. They know she would have came in dominating, and the story would be kind of what it is now. This is the brutal, unfiltered truth that the selection committees and the corporate sponsors have been terrified of. If they had put Caitlin Clark on that 2024 roster, she would not have sat on the bench and politely waited her turn. She would have stepped onto the international stage, immediately hijacked the entire offensive system, and rendered the established veterans completely irrelevant in front of a global audience of billions. The establishment knew that if she played, the entire narrative of the tournament would shift from the collective achievement of the legacy players to the absolute, undisputed crowning of the new monarch. They benched her not to protect her, but to protect themselves. They suppressed her brand equity because her sheer gravitational pull threatened to expose the systemic inefficiencies of the players they had spent a decade marketing. But you cannot suppress a fundamental force of nature forever. The dam has finally broken. The 200-day exile is over, and the vengeance she is bringing back to the court is going to be biblical in its execution. The time for polite negotiations and locker room diplomacy has officially expired. The coaching staff is currently holding a lit stick of dynamite and pretending it is a sparkler. Every single minute that Caitlin Clark spends sitting on the bench is a minute of wasted corporate leverage, a minute of stolen entertainment value, and a minute of tactical malpractice that borders on professional sabotage. The fans know it. The opposing teams know it. The veterans, deep down in the quiet moments of their own insecurity, know it. The illusion of the hierarchy has been permanently shattered by a 17-point, 12-assist, plus 35 demolition derby that required barely a quarter of actual exertion. You do not bring the most marketable, destructive, and efficient asset in the history of the sport off the bench to protect the feelings of a player who turns the ball over against a severely outmatched Senegalese team on the very first possession of the game. You do not ease the apex predator into the ecosystem. You unleash her and let the rest of the food chain figure out how to survive. This is the new world order of professional basketball. The era of slow, methodical, veteran-dominated half-court sets is dead and buried. The future belongs entirely to the pace, the space, and the algorithmic supremacy of Caitlin Clark.
She does not just play the game, she dictates the terms of the market. She sets the interest rates. She determines the valuation of every single asset on the floor. If the coaching staff refuses to immediately install her as the unquestioned starting focal point of this franchise, they are not just making a poor basketball decision. They are committing financial treason against their own organization. The reckoning is not coming.
The reckoning is already here, sitting on the bench, waiting to check in and systematically liquidate everything you thought you knew about the game. Start her now, or face the absolute, undeniable consequences of standing in front of a corporate freight train with no brakes. The boardroom is closed, the hostile takeover is complete, and Caitlin Clark holds every single share of the voting stock.